You're watching Beyond Markets. Welcome, I'm Esther Awuni. On today's show, we'll discuss the economic power of Nigeria's diaspora. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag Beyond Markets. You can send your thoughts, your comments to my Twitter handle. It's at Esther O. Awuni. Now, PwC Nigeria says for 4 consecutive years, official remittances to Nigeria have exceeded the country's oil revenues, with 2018 migrant remittances equaling $25 billion. Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria, joins me to discuss this. So, Andrew, let's get right into it, looking at how Nigeria's growing diaspora and the importance that this diaspora is having on the overall economy and even national development. But you put an interesting report together on the economic power of Nigeria's diaspora, contribution to national development, and where these remittances are coming from. And not just Nigeria, you also talk about Egypt. For 2018, Nigeria, Egypt, the two biggest remittances that we saw coming into the continent. But just help us unpack this report, the key highlights, starting from how big is this diaspora and what kind of monies are we talking about here in terms of the size?
Well, in terms of the size of the diaspora, the official number is 1.2 million in the diaspora, but that's Nigerians that have emigrated out.
Okay.
And we have at least 60,000 a year continuing to emigrate, the professionals that are emigrating. But the reality is the actual diaspora is much bigger because, of course, if there were people that left Nigeria in the 1970s, they've had very successful careers in the United States, their children are growing up. They have an attachment to Nigeria. They may not even have citizenship. So there's the broad view of the diaspora, which is about 15 million. And a significant part of that 15 million send remittances here. And of course, we know the countries where they're traditionally involved in, so the USA and the UK, increasingly Canada. But you'd also be surprised some of the European countries. Germany has a significant diaspora. Netherlands has a diaspora as well. So we're starting to get flows from all of these places.
Well, let's take a few steps backwards. At what point did we begin to recognize the importance of the diaspora and just taking a second look at those remittances, those inflows that started to come into the continent?
Well, I don't think anyone was talking about it until PwC started talking about it. So it was about a year ago. I mean, I was people know I speak here quite often. I started to do some events outside the country, and I encountered this incredible diaspora and just how successful it was. So in the US, for example, the Nigerian diaspora earns on average more than the average American, which there are other diaspora groups that do that, but for a new diaspora group, that's an amazing accomplishment. So very accomplished professionals, economic power, interested in Nigeria, interested in helping in Nigeria, sending money back, but not in a very structured way. So as I did more of these events outside the country, I said, well, why aren't we talking about it? We need to start to measure it. So about a year ago, we started to talk about it. I think about 8 or 9 months ago, everyone started to talk about it. Now we put it out in a report, and I think it's on the national agenda.
But in terms of not just Nigeria, what do you see? What is the trend on the African continent? Like I mentioned earlier, as was mentioned in the report, Egypt also are standing out amongst other in sub-Saharan Africa. But in terms of, the sub-Saharan African part, how much is coming in?
Well, I think if I remember from the report, maybe 70 billion is coming in. I may not have the number exactly right, but it's significant. And there are countries, in fact, that have a bigger amount, a percentage of their GDP coming in for the diaspora, so Liberia, for example. But I think everyone's now recognized. I mean, when people say, what's supporting Africa, some people might say aid supporting Africa. That's just not true. Some people might say, in our case, oil is supporting Nigeria. And it is to some extent. But at the end of the day, what is supporting Africa is Africans who are abroad and sending money. And why have we been late to recognize this? Because in a traditional, when I grew up studying economics, no one thought about this issue. I mean, 3.4% of the world's population are migrants, which means they live in a different country that they were born in. So there's huge flows. But when I learned economics, no one talked about it. But the other reason is because in economic theory, remittance is not a contractual obligation. So it's not, if you think about the way we measure an economy, we tend to measure contraction. It's thought of as a gift, but the reality is that it is a stable flow, in fact. And in our country, it's about over 6% of GDP is coming from these remittances.
I'm just wondering, what for Africa? Is this just an African thing, or it's perhaps research is not expanding to that extent? But do you imagine that this is probably the case with groups across who who are outside, living outside of their countries, and then this is just it's actually a global phenomenon?
No, it is a global phenomenon. I mean, there are other countries that are more exposed to remittances. So if you think of the Philippines exports mainly workers, a lot of domestic servants into Indonesia and Hong Kong, for example. They've exported to the Middle East. That's been a problem. They also export, if you go to Dubai, there are a lot of workers in the hospitality industry who come from the Philippines. So for them, it's been a major source. If you think of India, they have remittances at the high end and at the low end. So again, in the Middle East, all of the construction workers tend to come from the Indian subcontinent, so Bangladesh, Pakistan, or India. As India's got richer, it's rotated, so more of them, in fact, come from Bangladesh. But you also have Indians at the very high end. I mean, many who run global corporations, so they have a flow at both ends of all of this. So we're not the only place that has that, and I think we're starting to recognize, because the exodus from Africa over the last, sub-Saharan Africa over the last 20 years has accelerated, and we know in Nigeria it's accelerating, that economic power. But if you take Egypt, for example, it's a little bit like Nigeria in the sense of a large country, very well educated. There's a very well educated group of people, and yet they can't find opportunities in the country. So they tend to go, maybe not so far afield. They can go to Dubai, they can go to Saudi Arabia, and we have remittances of almost $30 billion. In the case of Nigeria, you have young professionals that feel they can't really get to where they want to here, so they end up emigrating to Canada, to the United States, to the UK.
It's quite interesting because, on the one hand, obviously, every government, every country wants to harness, its human capital potential. But when that doesn't happen and you have a lot of these professionals, as we see the case today in Nigeria, going out of the country, there is still, regardless, there's still that opportunity to harness that, diaspora that have gone outside of the country. But I'm curious to know what percentage, I'm just wondering, is it everyone that's outside that sends money back home? Do we know what percentage of the Nigerian diaspora actually send money?
I don't know, but when I've talked to them, when I've been to these conferences and talked to the diaspora, a lot of them do send money. So I think it's a significant percentage that feel attached. And I mean, in African culture, you need to support your wider family, and this flow does that.
Okay. Now, obviously, the Nigerian government has recognized that this is an opportunity. We even have a Diaspora Commission now. There's even a day dedicated to the Diaspora Day. So I'm just wondering, in what ways do you see Nigeria harnessing, not just Nigeria, but we'll start with Nigeria and other African countries who have recognized that this is an opportunity that it can harness. So in what ways do you see Nigeria harnessing this, the diaspora?
Well, so you're exactly right. So there's now a National Diaspora Commission headed by Akibi Dabiri. He's doing a very good job. The intent of the commission is to have more of a strategic approach to the diaspora, rather than just, this money was flowing in, no one was thinking about it. If you go back 6 or 7 years, the oil flow was still bigger, people focused on that. Now the diaspora flow is quite a bit bigger. So I think at the national level, what we're saying is, as the strategy is formulated, there needs to be an outreach to this group of people in an organized way. They're maybe suspicious is too strong, but they're hesitant about where Nigeria is and some of the issues we have here. So if you think about our strategy, of that diaspora money, in the surveys, 70% of it goes for current consumption. So things like healthcare, education, feeding in some cases, housing. But 30% wants to go to investment. But a lot of that investment is not channeled correctly because there aren't structures in Nigeria that let people invest in Nigeria. And some people don't necessarily, some people want to invest close to where they came from, and they want projects that they know are monitored and that they'll get the return. Some people want to invest in Nigeria generally, but in either case, we haven't put together the structure. So what we hope to see is the National Diaspora Commission working on those structures so people can feel safe that they can invest that money there. The other part of it is, if you read the paper, there's an estimate that 50% whatever the number is, so say 25 billion in our case, there's another 50% that comes in informally. And what does that mean? I mean, around the world and here in Nigeria, we have the Oboki type system. So actually it's hard to measure because no money moves across the border, right? So I need Canadian dollars. I have a Nigerian friend in Canada. The Nigerian friend wants to send some money to his or her family. So they send me some money in Canada. I send some Naira here. It's not recorded. So they're saying that flow is 50% of the official flow. So if you add the 25 billion of that plus 50% more, we're close to 40 billion. So these are significant amounts of money. So if we could start to harness some of it for productive investment in a way that satisfies the diaspora and they feel like their money's being taken care of, it'll make an enormous difference.
I mean, how do we do that? I mean, what would a typical scenario be?
Well, I think it happens at both levels. At the national level, they need to start to construct, I think there should be a private-led initiative for this. So you have a board that is mainly composed of private sector actors, so like the NSIA, the Sovereign Investment Authority. Exactly. And then what they do is that they then start to structure projects that they can accept diaspora investment in that have a return, and they're monitored in some way, and the information is available to all the investors. I mean, part of the structure may be that the funds like this have to be listed, because someone that invests $5,000 or $1,000, they're not a PE fund, so they may need to sell. So there needs to be a way to value at a time, and they may need to be listed. But I think some work on that kind of construction would be great. Then I think also what we're saying is at the state level, we actually think that if you look around the world, if we take India, for example, a lot of the diaspora outreach is at the state level, because someone may not necessarily be, or they may be attached to Nigeria, but they're more attached to Imo State, for example.
True.
So we would like to see the states' governors start to execute a playbook to reach their own diaspora. So that would include information, outreach, but then also, again, structuring projects. Now, I think at the state level, some of the projects could be pure CSR, could be effectively gifts from people if they're structured properly, but other ones would have to be investments.
I'm thinking that these groups would be easy to identify, because, you know, when Nigerians are abroad, speak for Nigeria now, I mean, the different ethnic groups, they have a way of just clustering together. They have associations, so you know that this is the Igbo group of, you know, in Maryland, the US, or this Yoruba group in Ontario, Canada. So I'm just thinking they're easy to spot. But that aside, I know that there's also a diaspora bond that the federal government also, you know, floated, and, you know, it was well received. And I'm thinking that would be one good step. But I'm just wondering for the federal government, because if there's no strategy, this could become a missed opportunity. And according to, and as your report also pointed out, more Nigerians are still planning to
Right. Well, I mean, every week people at PwC come and talk to me about Canada. So they're either want to talk about it, or they have their residency, or they're calling me from Canada to help them, you know, get settled there. So it's happening, and I think we're going to put another paper around the impact of this brain drain. But in the short term, I mean, we're getting all of this money. I mean, the whole point of the National Diaspora Commission is to get a strategy about tapping it, and, you know, we're confident that they're going to be able to do that.
Well, you know, many times I hear the diaspora, many of them talking that, look, we want to be part of nation building. We want to do more for the country, and I'm thinking that's already a hand extended, you know, from the diaspora.
But the diaspora
itself.
I mean, as I said, when I went
not
to,
just even remittances, they want, you know,
they
want to be part of politics,
want to help.
I mean,
one of the things I think about, certainly the state outreach, is that they should be asking not just for money, they should be asking for skills. So, for example, I've attended some conferences where there's a lot of the diaspora who are in the medical professions. They want to help with the healthcare system here. Now, you could do that at the national level, but I suspect it would be more effective if states organized a way for the diaspora attached to that state to contribute. So you can contribute both skills and you can contribute money, but the projects have to be structured. I mean, the diaspora's greatest fear is that they put in resources, either their time or their money, and they get squandered. Right. So the goodwill is there, but let's not squander it with projects that don't lead anywhere. And they want the monitoring. I mean, we've all heard the stories in Nigeria of a diaspora who've sent money, they thought, to their own relatives to build a house, and when they come to Nigeria, there's no house.
It wasn't a house, it was something else. We know, we've ever heard these stories. So we're just going to take a break at this point, and I'll come back and pick up from where I left off. Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. We're continuing our discussion on the economic power of Nigeria's diaspora. Still with me is Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Andrew, let's pick up from where we left off. Now let's talk about the costs of these remittances and, I mean, the trend that we're seeing, not just here in Africa, but globally.
Right, so I think in the report we say globally remittances cost about 7% of the value. So if you're sending $200, that's $14. That's very expensive, and it's really something that affects the people remitting small amounts the most. I mean, if you're using the bank, it's typically at least $25. If you're sending $10,000, that might be a small percentage. If you're sending $100 or $200, it's prohibitive. So one of the Sustainable Development Goals, and sorry, for Africa, that number's even higher, over 10%, I think we say in the, 9% we say in the report. Okay. So now you cannot really, I mean, that is egregious that someone has to spend 9% of the amount of the money to send it back to their relatives for things that they need for feeding, et cetera. So, but this is evolving very fast in a few directions. I mean, to begin with, I was talking earlier about the Aboki system. Of course, this 9% only measures the official flows. There's a lot of people, 50% more, who are using unofficial channels where the cost is extremely low. The spreads are because the money is not moving across borders, in effect. So those people have voted to say, we're not going to pay 9%. We're going to find a system and a way of matching up informally to be able to do that. But that is happening. What's going to happen to that, or is happening to that, is that activity, kind of a Aboki activity, is rapidly becoming driven by apps that aggregate. I was
going to say that. I mean, technology, and technology is changing.
Right. So you think about how the Aboki system works. There's a complete level of trust, right? So I trust my Aboki. I've never had a problem. It's instantaneous on that. But if I had an app, what the app needs to do is, if I send the Naira, before they hit the other individual's account, they in a sense have to be in a locked box. Like you can kind of see on the app, it's kind of in that locked box. Simultaneously, the person in Canada sending it sits in the locked box. When the two locked boxes are there, the funds get released and go to the right person. But that technology is there, and it would go from 9% to effectively almost 0%. I mean, I think you'll have spreads of 1%, 0.5% or something like that. So I think the cost will come down. But the other interesting aspect is it's really related to this Libra project. So there's been so much criticism of
Facebook's
Libra, right? Okay. Because if you think about it, why is that so threatening to the banking system? Because you could have an instantaneous, zero-cost transfer of value of Libra from the U.S., if you're there, into Africa. And we know exactly the value of Libra because it would be backed. Libra's backed. It's not like Bitcoin. It's backed by very specific securities. So this many treasury bonds. And there's an actual
reserve where you can go and
so you know the value of it.
Okay.
So the only criticism. So I think it would be very, very good for this. The criticism I have of Libra, however, is if we're going to have something like that used in Africa, let's create an Africa version of that digital asset that Africans can control. And that would be, I think, even more effective. We are giving some of the value away to Facebook, which we can debate whether that's, but that way, so either having these peer-to-peer automated apps that have people matching sort of under the Aboki system, or having some kind of digital asset, either way is going to bring the cost way down.
Well, what do you see happening? I mean, because I know that, right? I mean, they're gradually eliminating the middlemen and bringing the cost down. So I'm just wondering, what would the trend? How would the trend evolve from there? Are we going to get to a point where perhaps almost zero, and then it's just? I mean, how does technology help us leapfrog in that?
Well, I think in 5 years we'll be there. So I think someone who's relying on the $25 fee at the bank, or the Western Union relying on its high percentage fee, that is going to disappear within 5 years. And I think what will happen is we'll have both systems. We'll have this kind of peer matching. I mean, there's a company very successful in the developed world called TransferWise that figured this out. So they didn't really build this for remittances, sort of home, but they built it for remittances, but more between developed nations. Okay. So they just started matching up. You were sitting in France and had euros. You wanted to go to the UK. You needed pounds. Someone from the UK was going to go to. They could go anywhere with the Eurozone. Netherlands, they needed euros. They started to match, and they've had a very successful business. But that concept is rapidly coming to these transfers from developing nations, people who are working in developed nations. So that's going to happen. But I think it'll be simultaneously with digital currencies. I think once people get a hold of digital currencies and realize you can transfer value instantly and at no cost, it's going to go very fast.
Let's talk about, the diaspora population continues to grow, and as we mentioned earlier, there are still people, I mean, immigration, it's a global phenomenon. People are always moving, but because now we are in more difficult economic times, we're seeing certain countries, certain regions seeing higher rates of people moving out of the country. But obviously, at the same time, it's still an opportunity. So, but what kind of economic impact as this progresses? What kind of economic impact can this have on an economy if the full potential is harnessed? Well,
actually, let me just, before we'll come to that, let me add one other piece that's very interesting to me in my recent trip. So when I've been in the U.S., the last few times I've spoke to the diaspora, the conferences have included not just the diaspora, but African Americans. So you're now talking about a diaspora that left involuntarily 400 years ago that want to be connected to Africa. So you think about
trying to trace their
trace their roots, and particularly in the climate in the United States, the kind of where are they connected to, where are they accepted, and but so you think of the 1.2 million as the official diaspora number, the wider 15 million of people of Nigerian descent who may not have passports or second generation. Then you have this much larger group in Brazil and the United States in particular, but also in the UK, that really have an affinity for Africa. So I think any diaspora strategy should consider that very wide group and kind of get them involved in the African project. They want to invest, they want to bring their skills, they want to be connected. I think the governor of Edo State, Governor Obaseki, had a visit, brought African Americans to Edo State, because of course it's the center of the Benin Empire, and put the tourism as we build that up. So I think that wider diaspora is something that the National Diaspora Commission should really consider.
I was just looking at some numbers. I mean, what's your report projects in terms of how these numbers are going to grow? 2019, we're expecting around 25.5 billion. 2021, 29.8. 2023, 34.8. So obviously, this numbers are going to climb, right, and there's going to be more people also.
Right. So I mean, when we're in a situation where we're not giving the young professionals enough opportunities, they're going to continue to leave the country. And of course, if we've had a lot leave in the last 5-10 years, they've now got established in their home economy. Because the first year or two you go as emigrate, you're probably not sending any remittance. But once you get on the career path in Canada, your income is going up, plus we're adding new people. So the numbers are going up in our projections very fast. By 2023, almost 35 billion in official remittances to Nigeria. So these are very big numbers. But of course, once there are also more opportunities here that we can structure, we'll get the benefit the other way, which is a flow back. And we also get, the connectivity benefits. So if you think about a country like Ireland, there are many more Irish descendants, people of Irish heritage, I'm of Irish heritage, than there are people in Ireland. I don't know the exact number, but many more times.
Actually, I think I did. I saw the statistics. Actually.
Lebanon is the same way, right? And both Lebanon and Ireland have had different challenges at different times. But they have this incredible diaspora that's very connected, so then the country becomes very connected globally. So Africa, the one big advantage of all this is the connectivity of Africa to the rest of the world is much higher than people really realize.
So is that an example that Nigeria can look to? Because many times when we're going into a project or something like this that we haven't done before and or having difficulty just putting in a structure into it, it can be profitable when one looks to an example, maybe a similar economy or not, but where it's worked. So for you, looking across the globe, you just mentioned Ireland. I'm just wondering, where can Nigeria take a leaf from or take an example from?
Well, I think the thing about the Irish is because they have such a large diaspora, it really creates goodwill in many countries around the world, right? And because people are, and of course, St. Patrick's Day, some people in Ireland don't like it, but it connects people. So if you think about our situation in Nigeria, we're struggling now with a negative image, right? Our brand image. So the only positive, and people read the news and all they read about is Boko Haram and traffic jams in Lagos and poverty. But in Canada, the high number of Nigerian professionals means that people, the one positive thing they see is that professional they work with, because that's very, very tangible. And I think that's going to make a big difference to us in the longer term.
But looking on the other side of the coin, while there are benefits, how do we, what outweighs the other? The brain drain that we're seeing, and if this continues, I'm thinking that this could potentially, dramatically change the economic fortunes
destabilize
of sub-Saharan countries where it's happening.
Yeah, as I said, we're going to start to try to analyze, and we're not sure how to analyze it. We're not even sure if you can analyze it, but I think the country's asking that question. We get the remittances, we get that we need it, but what's the long-term impact?
Can we quantify this brain drain?
Right. So then now let's take it and say, actually, I think we should be using the brain drain of professionals as a bit of a litmus test of whether the country's heading in the right direction. So we can say to the federal government and state governments, look, if people continue to leave, they want to come back. I mean, I remember in the period running up to when I moved here in 2008, there were many people that had come here in 2004, 2005, 2006. Then we had the crisis in 2009, but then 2011, 2012, 2013, people continued to come back, and then of course we had the oil crash and it reversed. So there is the natural flow is actually to come back, right? So I think it's a very good litmus test for the country if we can get some of that reversal of flow. If the economy goes well, we're going to see a big flow back. We'll see it at least two types. There'll be some older people, older, my age, in their 50s, who've had very successful careers abroad and want to come back and invest in the country. And then what we'll have is a reversal of the 30-something professionals, because while they're doing well abroad, they see bigger opportunities in Nigeria. But we should be measuring that. I think it's a very good litmus test.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for talking to us today.
Very welcome.
That was Andrew Nevin, partner and chief economist at PwC Nigeria. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. But remember that you can watch all previous episodes of the show on our website at cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Market. You can send your thoughts, your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awuni. From myself and the team, it's bye for now.